Grace had spent most of her life believing suffering had a moral logic she could understand if she looked long enough. Bad choices brought pain. Good choices brought peace. Sin opened doors. Obedience closed them. Wisdom protected people. Prayer changed outcomes. Faith made life steadier. She knew there were exceptions, of course. She was not childish. She had read Job. She had seen cancer in kind people and long lives in cruel ones. But somewhere beneath her theology, hidden under better words, she still believed a quiet bargain. If you love God, live decently, forgive quickly, give generously, and try not to hurt people, then suffering may visit, but it will not move in. Then the diagnosis came, and the bargain died before she did. It began in a clean doctor's office with a fern in the corner and a framed print of a beach on the wall, as if painted water could soften the sound of medical sentences. Grace sat beside her husband Nathan, holding a folder of test results. Neither of them understood well enough to fear properly yet. The doctor spoke carefully. Doctors have a tone for ordinary inconvenience and another tone for sentences that divide life into before and after. Nathan reached for her hand under the desk. She let him. The doctor said the word malignant. Grace heard the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. A small round clock above the door, moving forward with obscene confidence while her life stopped beneath it. The doctor kept speaking. Treatment options, further scans, specialist referral, possible surgery. We caught it here. We need to move quickly. There are reasons to be hopeful. Grace watched his mouth move and felt her mind step back from the room. She thought of the casseroles she had made for other people in this exact kind of season, the verses she had written in cards, the prayers she had prayed with warm confidence beside hospital beds, the sentence she had used so many times because it was true and kind and biblical. God is with you in this. Now the sentence stood at the door of her own life and asked to be let in. She did not want it. She wanted a different sentence. This must be a mistake. On the drive home, Nathan kept one hand on the steering wheel and one hand on hers. The city outside looked offensively normal. A man jogging with earbuds, a woman carrying flowers, children spilling out of a school gate, someone laughing into a phone, life moving with no awareness that Grace's body had become a battlefield. Nathan said, "We'll get through this." She turned toward the window. "Will we?" She did not say it. Saying it would make it too real, too cruel to him, too faithless maybe. So she said nothing. Silence entered the car and sat between them. That was the first lesson suffering taught her, though she would not name it until later. Good people suffer because goodness was never a contract that made the world safe. The Bible never promised that the righteous would be untouched by pain. It promised something deeper and harder to accept, that God is present in a world where righteousness can still bleed. Job was described as blameless and upright, a man who feared God and shunned evil. Job chapter 1. The story does not begin by telling us he was secretly wicked. It begins by telling us he was faithful. That is what makes the book unbearable. Job's suffering was not explained by a simple moral failure. His friends tried to make it simple. They needed it to be simple. If Job had caused his suffering, then the universe still felt controllable. But God rejected their shallow explanations. Their tidy theology was not comfort. It was accusation wearing religious clothes. Grace did not think of Job immediately. At first, she thought of laundry. There were towels in the washer, a bill on the counter, a message from her daughter asking what time dinner would be, a church group reminder about a meal train for someone else. The absurdity of ordinary tasks after terrible news almost made her laugh. Almost. She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at shelves of food she no longer wanted. Nathan stood behind her and said, "You don't have to cook." "I know." She kept staring. "Grace, I know." He touched her shoulder. She flinched, not because he hurt her, because kindness touched the place she was trying to keep from breaking. She closed the refrigerator and said, "I need a minute." She went upstairs, into the bedroom, and shut the door. Not loudly, that would have been too dramatic. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the mirror across the room. The woman looking back had the same hair, same face, same sweater, same hands. Nothing visible had changed. That offended her. A person should look different after the word malignant. The body should have the honesty to show what it is carrying. On the dresser sat a small wooden cross her mother had given her years ago. Grace had always loved it. Simple, carved olive wood, smooth from being touched. That afternoon, it looked like an accusation. "You believe this, don't you?" She picked it up, then put it down. The second lesson came through that small refusal. Suffering reveals not only what you believe, but what you have been using belief to avoid. Grace believed in the cross. Truly. She believed Jesus suffered. She believed he was crucified, buried, raised. She had taught younger women that Christianity is not a promise of comfort, but a call to follow the crucified Lord. She had said those words, meant them, but now the cross was no longer doctrine in her mouth. It was a shape pressing into her life. Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." Luke chapter 9. Grace had always heard that as obedience, sacrifice, surrender. Now it sounded more physical. Daily. Not once in a dramatic altar moment. Daily when the scan is scheduled. Daily when the body aches. Daily when fear wakes before dawn. Daily when people say the wrong thing. Daily when healing has not yet come. Daily when faith must be carried by hands that shake. She lay down without removing her shoes. She did not pray. That frightened her more than crying would have. For 2 days, Grace became efficient. Efficient people can delay grief by becoming useful to their own crisis. She made calls, scheduled appointments, created folders, researched doctors, answered messages with measured language. We're still processing. God is good. Taking next steps. Thank you for praying. All incomplete. At church on Sunday, people hugged her carefully. News had spread. The pastor prayed for her during the service, tenderly, without making a spectacle. Grace stood while people around her stretched hands in her direction. She felt loved. She also felt trapped. Public prayer can be beautiful, and still the person receiving it may want to disappear under the floor. Afterward, a woman named Denise approached her. Denise had survived breast cancer years before and carried the calm authority of someone who knew hospital rooms from the inside. She did not say, "You've got this." She did not say, "Everything happens for a reason." She did not say, "Everything happens for a reason." She did not say, "Stay positive." She put a small paper bag in Grace's hand. "Ginger candies," Denise said, "for nausea. You may not need them, but if you do, you won't want to shop for them." Grace stared at the bag. That almost broke her. Not the prayer, not the sermon. Ginger candies. Practical mercy. Denise leaned closer. People will say many things. Some will be helpful. Some will be noise. You do not have to defend God from your pain. Grace looked up. Denise's eyes were steady. "You can tell him the truth," she said. Grace swallowed hard. "What if the truth is ugly? Then he will not be surprised." That was the third lesson. Suffering does not require polished prayer. It invites truthful prayer. The Bible gives us lament because God is not honored by fake calm. David asked, "How long?" Jeremiah wept. Elijah wanted to die under a broom tree. Job cursed the day of his birth. Jesus himself in Gethsemane said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Matthew chapter 26. The Son of God did not hide agony behind religious composure. He brought sorrow to the Father. Grace carried the ginger candies home like a sacrament. That night, fear finally reached her. Not while reading medical articles, not while telling her daughter the basics, not while Nathan cried quietly in the shower, thinking the water covered the sound. It reached her at 2:17 in the morning when the house was dark and her body would not let her sleep. She lay still, eyes open, listening to Nathan breathe. The diagnosis became enormous in the dark. Pain imagined itself forward. Surgery, chemo, hair loss, weakness, bills, her daughter's face, Nathan eating alone, the possibility of not seeing next Christmas. The possibility of leaving drawers full of ordinary things someone else would have to sort. She got out of bed and went downstairs. The kitchen was cold. The clock on the microwave glowed green. 2:17. She opened the paper bag, took one ginger candy, unwrapped it, and held it in her palm without eating it. The smell was sure. Then she prayed the first honest prayer since the diagnosis. God, I am angry that this is my story. The words did not echo. No lightning came. So she continued. I have loved you. I have tried to be faithful. I know that does not make me immune. I know the Bible says suffering comes. I know all the right things. But I am angry that my daughter has to hear the word cancer. I am angry that Nathan has to look brave. I am angry that my body has become something I cannot trust. I am angry that people who are cruel get healthy years while I am sitting here with ginger candy at 2 in the morning, trying not to be terrified. Her hand shook. The candy wrapper lay on the table like evidence. Are you still good if this gets worse? There, the real question, not are you powerful. She believed he was powerful. That was part of the ache, not are you present. She believed he was present. She believed he was present, though she could not feel it clearly. The question was goodness, the same question sufferers have asked in different forms across centuries. If you could stop this and do not stop it now, what do I do with your goodness? She waited. No answer came in the way she wanted, but a verse came unwelcome and quiet. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job chapter 13. Grace hated that verse at first. It sounded too severe, too demanding, too much like surrender before she had been allowed to protest. But she looked it up on her phone and read Job's words in context. They were not spoken by a man pretending pain was small. They came from a man covered in sores, bereaved, accused, confused, arguing with God and still refusing to let go of him. Though he slay me was not emotional numbness. It was defiant attachment. Job did not understand God, but he would not seek final refuge anywhere else. That was the fourth lesson. Biblical hope is not optimism that things will improve. It is clinging to God when improvement is not yet visible. Grace put the candy in her mouth. Sharp sweetness filled her tongue. She sat alone in the kitchen, angry and hoping, afraid and praying, wounded and still turned toward God. That was not strong faith in the way she once imagined strength, but it was faith. Bruised, awake, still facing him. By the morning of the first scan, Grace had learned that waiting rooms have their own kind of theology. Every chair holds a question. Every face hides a sentence. Every fretboard asks you to reduce your fear into boxes. Are you allergic to anything? Have you had previous surgeries? Rate your pain from 1 to 10. But no form asks the question sitting under all the others. What are you afraid God will allow? The radiology waiting room was colder than it needed to be. A television played silently in the corner, with captions running beneath a cooking show, a woman smiling over a bowl of lemons, as if the world were not full of bodies waiting to be examined for hidden threats. Nathan sat beside Grace, holding her coat in his lap. He looked at his phone, not reading anything, just touching the screen occasionally because stillness was too much. Across from them, an elderly man slept with his mouth slightly open, while his wife kept one hand on his knee. A young mother bounced a toddler and stared at the door each time a nurse called a name. Grace held the small wooden cross in her pocket. She had almost left it at home, angry at herself for needing an object. Then she remembered that God had given his people stones of remembrance: oil, bread, wine, water, altars, tassels, a rod, a tabernacle, a torn curtain. Human beings forget with their bodies, and sometimes they remember with their hands. The cross in her pocket was not magic. It was weight, texture. A small way to tell her trembling body, this is still true. A nurse called her name. Nathan stood immediately. Grace did not. For 1 second, her body refused the future. Then she rose. The scan itself was not painful, only humiliating in the way medical procedures can be humiliating. Change here. Lie still. Hold your breath. Do not move. A machine large enough to resemble judgment moved around her while she stared upward and tried not to imagine what it might reveal. The voice from the speaker told her when to breathe, when to stop breathing, when to wait. She had never been so aware of her body and so unable to control what it contained. That was the fifth lesson. Suffering strips away the illusion that we are in control of our own lives. James says, "You do not even know what will happen tomorrow." What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. James chapter 4. Grace had read that before as a warning against arrogance in planning. Now it felt literal. A mist, visible briefly, then gone. The scan did not make her fragile. It revealed that she had always been fragile. Health had simply allowed her to feel otherwise. When the machine grew louder, she closed her eyes and whispered inside herself, "I am a mist, but I am a mist." It was a strange prayer. It helped. Afterward, Nathan drove her home through bright noon traffic. They stopped at a pharmacy for a prescription she might need later. The pharmacist asked routine questions in a routine voice. Grace answered like a person from far away. Outside, a man complained loudly that the line was taking too long. Grace wanted to turn around and say, "People are receiving medications that may help them survive, and you are angry about 6 minutes." But then she remembered how many times she had been that man in another form, irritated by delays, entitled to smoothness, unaware of the invisible suffering around her. That was the sixth lesson. Suffering can enlarge compassion if bitterness does not close the heart first. Before the diagnosis, Grace had cared about people. She was not cold, but now she saw waiting rooms differently. She saw pharmacy lines differently. She saw slow walkers, distracted cashiers, tired nurses, curt receptionists, and quiet church members with a new suspicion. There may be pain here. I cannot see. Jesus looked at crowds and had compassion because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew chapter 9. He saw beneath motion, beneath behavior, beneath inconvenience. Suffering was teaching Grace to see a little lower than the surface. At home, her daughter Emma was at the kitchen table with homework spread around her like a paper storm. She was 15, old enough to understand danger, young enough to still want her mother to be indestructible. She looked up when they entered. "How was it?" Grace took off her shoes. "Uncomfortable, but okay. When do you know?" "A few days." Emma nodded too quickly. A few days had become a country none of them wanted to live in. That evening, Emma hovered near Grace more than usual, pretended to need help with an essay, pretended to look for a charger in the living room, pretended to be annoyed by Nathan's questions while staying close enough to hear every adult whisper. Grace watched her daughter trying to act normal and felt a grief that had nothing to do with her own body. Illness had entered Emma's childhood without permission. After dinner, Emma finally asked, "Are you going to die?" Nathan froze at the sink. Grace felt the room tilt. There are questions children ask that destroy every shallow answer. She wanted to say no. She wanted to promise. She wanted to protest. Emma with certainty she did not possess. But false certainty is not love. It is fear trying to sound kind. Grace sat beside her daughter. "I don't know exactly what will happen," she said slowly. "The doctors are going to treat this. We have reasons to hope." Emma's eyes filled. "That's not the same as no." "No," Grace said, voice breaking. "It isn't." Nathan turned away, one hand over his mouth. Grace took Emma's hand. "But I know this. I belong to Jesus, and whatever happens, he will not leave me, and he will not leave you." Emma started crying then, not loudly, but with the stunned sorrow of a girl learning that love cannot always promise control. Grace held her. Nathan came and sat on the other side, and for a while the family stayed like that at the kitchen table, 3 people holding one another in a truth none of them wanted. That was the 7th lesson. Faith does not mean giving people false certainty. Faith tells the truth under the presence of God. Jesus never built hope on denial. When Lazarus was sick, he did not say death was imaginary. When he stood at the tomb, he wept. When he spoke to Martha, he did not offer vague comfort. He said, "I am the resurrection and the life." John chapter 11. Not, You will never stand by graves. Not, those who love me will avoid tears. I am. The hope was not in an outcome they could control. The hope stood in front of them as a person. Later that night, Grace found Emma asleep with the bedroom light still on. A biology textbook lay open beside her, uselessly, as if school could keep moving through cancer with perfect obedience. Grace turned off the light, then stood there in the doorway longer than necessary. She thought of Mary watching Jesus suffer. The sword Simeon had said would pierce her soul. Grace had always thought of Mary's pain from a distance, as part of holy art. Now motherhood made the scene less distant. To suffer is one thing. To watch your child suffer because you suffer is another. She went downstairs and found Nathan in the garage. He was not fixing anything. He was standing beside a shelf of paint cans, crying quietly with both hands on the workbench. Grace had seen Nathan cry before, but rarely like this. Unprotected, bent, angry at his own helplessness. She wanted to comfort him. She also wanted him to comfort him. She also wanted him to comfort her. Both needs stood in the garage between the bicycles, the old cooler, and a rake hanging badly on the wall. I don't know what to do, he said without looking up. Grace walked to him. Me neither. I'm supposed to help you. You are. I'm not doing anything. You drove me, you sat there, you held my coat. He shook his head almost bitterly. That's nothing. Grace touched his arm. It wasn't nothing to me. He looked at her then, and she saw the particular suffering of those who love the suffering, the pain of not being able to trade places. Nathan would have taken the diagnosis into his own body if he could, but love cannot always remove suffering. Sometimes, love can only remain. That was the 8th lesson. When God does not remove suffering immediately, presence becomes a holy form of help. The friends of Job did one thing right at first. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one said a word, because they saw how great his suffering was. Job chapter 2. Their silence was better than their speeches. Their presence was better than their explanations. They became dangerous when they tried to make pain make sense too quickly. Grace realized she did not need Nathan to solve her terror that night. She needed him not to flee from it. And perhaps that was one way God was helping. Not by giving Nathan answers, but by keeping him beside her in the garage. The next day brought messages, so many messages, some beautiful, some awkward, some harmful without meaning to be. A friend texted, "God only gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers." Grace stared at it until anger rose into her face. She was not a soldier chosen because of superior strength. She was a woman who wanted her old life back. Another person wrote, "Everything happens for a reason." Maybe, Grace thought, but not every reason belongs in a text message. Someone sent a video about natural cures. Someone else asked for exact details she did not want to share. One woman simply wrote, "I am sitting with you in prayer today. No need to respond." Grace cried over that one. That was the 9th lesson. Suffering teaches the difference between words that explain and words that bear. Proverbs says, "Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Proverbs chapter 12. Not every true statement is wise in every moment. Job's friends said many things that were technically connected to truth, but wrongly applied. Jesus, by contrast, knew when to speak, when to weep, when to touch, when to ask, when to remain silent. Grace began to understand that comfort is not proven by how much theology you can fit into someone else's wound. Sometimes the holiest sentence is, "I am here." Sometimes the holiest restraint is not sending the paragraph. She started a note in her phone titled, "Things Not to Say," then another titled, "Things That Help." Under Things That Help, she wrote, "Ginger candies. No need to respond. Sitting in silence. Asking before visiting. Telling the truth gently. Practical help. Scripture without pressure. Tears that do not panic. Under Things Not to Say, she wrote, at least. Everything happens. Be positive. Strong soldier. Miracle cure. God needed an angel. Compare stories. Demand updates. She looked at the 2 lists and realized suffering had become a teacher she had never wanted but could not ignore. The scan results came on a Thursday afternoon. Nathan was with her. The doctor explained the staging, the plan, the urgency, the hope. It was serious, treatable, he said. Not easy, not quick, but there was a path. Surgery first, then likely chemotherapy, more tests, more waiting. Grace heard two words more than the others. Serious, path. That was life now. Serious, but a path. In the car afterward, Nathan said, "There's a path." Grace nodded, then began to sob. He pulled into a grocery store parking lot because he could not drive while she cried like that. She cried from fear, from relief, from dread, from the exhaustion of waiting, from gratitude that there was a path, from rage that the path existed at all. Nathan did not tell her to calm down. He turned off the car and let her cry. When the sobs slowed, she said, "I hate this path. I know. I'm grateful there is one. I know." Both are true. Yes, that was the 10th lesson. Biblical faith often holds grief and gratitude in the same hands. Paul wrote, "Sorrowful, yet always rejoicing." 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Not sorrowful or rejoicing. Sorrowful, yet rejoicing. The Christian life does not require flattening emotional reality into one acceptable mood. Grace could hate cancer and thank God for treatment. She could fear surgery and receive the kindness of skilled doctors. She could cry in a parking lot and still believe God had not abandoned her. Gratitude did not cancel grief. Grief did not cancel gratitude. Both could exist under the sovereignty of God. Before going home, they went into the grocery store because they needed milk, bread, and detergent. Grace found this almost offensive and then strangely comforting. Life had not paused for treatment plans. Bodies still needed food. Clothes still needed washing. Emma still needed cereal. Nathan stood in the detergent aisle comparing prices with red eyes, and Grace suddenly loved him so fiercely it hurt. Suffering had made ordinary things shine with unbearable tenderness. That was the 11th lesson. Suffering can reveal the holiness of ordinary gifts. James says every good and perfect gift is from above. James chapter 1. Grace had believed that about obvious blessings. Now milk in a cart felt like mercy. Clean sheets, warm socks, a hand on the steering wheel, a teenager's messy handwriting, a husband choosing detergent after hearing the word chemotherapy, a bowl of soup, a church friend leaving dinner on the porch without ringing the bell. Ordinary life had been full of gifts before. Suffering had removed the illusion that they were guaranteed. Surgery came 2 weeks later. The morning was dark when they left the house. Emma hugged Grace too tightly at the door and tried not to cry, which made Grace cry. Nathan drove through nearly empty streets. At the hospital, everything became procedure: wristband, gown, questions, IV, consent forms, warm blanket. Grace held the wooden cross until the nurse said she had to give personal items to Nathan. She did not want to let it go. Nathan took it and closed his fist around it. "I'll hold it," he said. That helped more than it should have. Before they wheeled her back, the surgeon came, then the anesthesiologist, then a nurse with kind eyes who checked her name and date of birth. Grace wanted to ask everyone if they understood they were touching a life, not a schedule, but they did. In their own way, they did. Nathan bent close. "I love you. I love you too." She wanted to say more, something memorable, something worthy of a dramatic scene. Instead, she said, "Don't forget, Emma has rehearsal tonight." Nathan laughed and cried at the same time. "I won't." As they wheeled her down the hall, Grace stared at the ceiling lights passing one by one. She thought of Jesus in Gethsemane again. Not because surgery was the cross, but because fear in a body can become prayer. "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Luke chapter 22. Jesus did not pretend the cup was sweet. He asked for it to pass, then surrendered the Father's will. That was the 12th lesson. Surrender is not pretending the cup is easy. Surrender is trusting the Father while asking honestly for the cup to pass. Grace prayed it badly as the hallway moved. "Father, I want this cup gone. Father, not my will. Father, I am scared. Father, hold Nathan. Father, hold Emma. Father, hold me." Then the operating room was bright and cold. A mask. As someone said she would feel sleepy, she thought of the cross in Nathan's hand. Then the world dissolved. When she woke, pain was waiting, not unbearable but real, heavy, thick, her mouth dry, her body foreign. Nathan's face above her blurred at first, then clearer. "You're okay," he said. Surgery went well. She wanted to ask many things, could not. She squeezed his hand. Later, in the hospital room, half awake and drifting, she heard Nathan speaking with someone. Denise, the woman with the ginger candies. Grace opened her eyes. Denise stood near the foot of the bed with a small bag. "More ginger," Denise said, "for the next chapter." Grace tried to smile. Denise came closer. "You made it through today. Today. Not the whole path. Today." That was the 13th lesson. God often gives grace for the day, not the entire imagined future. When Israel gathered manna in the wilderness, it was daily bread, not warehouses of certainty, not enough for every fear ahead, enough for the day. Exodus chapter 16, Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Give us today our daily bread." Matthew chapter 6. Grace had wanted grace for chemotherapy, test results, recurrence fears, future scans, Emma's adulthood, Nathan's loneliness, every possible grief. God gave grace for surgery day, pain medication, a nurse, Nathan's hand, Denise's ginger candies, one day's bread. The next weeks were harder than inspirational stories admit. Recovery was slow. She hated needing help to shower, hated sleeping upright, hated the drainage tubes, hated the way people praised her bravery when she felt mostly irritable and dependent. Emma became quiet, then angry over small things. Nathan overfunctioned until one evening he snapped at a pharmacy employee and came home ashamed. Grace's church friends helped, but help itself was humbling. Meals on the porch, rides for Emma, someone cleaning the bathroom, someone seeing dust under the furniture. Need is intimate. That was the 14th lesson. Suffering can become a school of humility because it forces us to receive what pride would rather give. Peter did not want Jesus to wash his feet. "You shall never wash my feet," he said. John chapter 13. It sounded reverent, but it was resistance. Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Grace had always admired serving. Receiving service was harder. Serving allowed her to remain strong, useful, admirable. Being served exposed need. But the kingdom is not entered by those who only give from above. It is entered by those willing to be washed by Christ and helped by his people. One afternoon, a woman from church named Hannah came to clean. Grace barely knew her. That made it worse. Hannah arrived with gloves, a bucket, and no emotional fuss. Grace apologized for the mess. Hannah said, "Please do not steal my blessing by pretending you don't need help." Grace laughed, then cried, then let her clean the bathroom. Humility smelled like bleach that day. Chemotherapy began in a room full of recliners, IV poles, blankets, and people at different stages of the same unwanted road. Some bald, some wearing bright scarves, some asleep, some talking too cheerfully, some silent, eyes closed, enduring. Grace chose a chair by the window. Nathan sat beside her. The nurse explained the medication, side effects, timing. Grace nodded like a student preparing for a test she had never wanted to take. When the infusion began, she felt strangely calm for 10 minutes. Then fear rose. What if this does not work? What if it comes back? What if I cannot endure months of this? What if I become someone my family has to survive? She closed her eyes. A verse from Romans chapter 8 came, not as a slogan, but as a rope. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? Paul did not answer by denying trouble. He listed it: trouble, hardship, danger, sword. Then said that in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Not away from these things, in them, and nothing in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. That was the 15th lesson. Suffering cannot separate God's people from the love of Christ. Not cancer, not fear, not surgery, not chemotherapy, not weakness, not people saying the wrong thing, not nights at 2:17, not scan results, not the body changing, not even death itself. Grace opened her eyes. The IV line ran into her arm. Nathan was reading beside her, though she could tell he had not turned a page in 20 minutes. Across the room, an older woman in a red scarf was humming softly. The world had become very small. Chair, bag, tube, window, hand, breath. But Romans 8 made it vast again. Nothing can separate. That did not mean everything would be fine in the shallow sense. It meant she was held in the deepest sense. Months passed. Not beautifully. Really, her hair thinned, then fell. Emma cried when Grace shaved the rest, then asked if she could wear one of the scarves too. Nathan learned medication schedules. Grace learned which foods tasted like metal. Church people kept coming, some less often as the crisis became less new, which hurt until Grace realized long suffering is hard for everyone to accompany. Denise stayed. Hannah cleaned twice more. Mara from the prayer team sent one verse every Monday and never demanded a response. There were good scans. There were frightening blood counts. There were days Grace felt almost normal and then paid for it with exhaustion. There were nights she told God she was tired of being brave, and God did not seem offended. One evening, after treatment, Grace stood before the mirror with a scarf half tied and stopped. The woman looking back was not the woman from the doctor's office months earlier. Her face was thinner, eyes larger, skin duller, body marked by surgery. But the wooden cross lay on the dresser where Nathan had placed it after surgery, and she picked it up again. This time it did not feel like accusation. It felt like companionship. The cross did not explain all suffering. It entered it. The cross did not answer every why. It answered who. Who is God in suffering? Not distant, crucified. Not untouched, wounded. Not indifferent, weeping at tombs, sweating blood in gardens, bearing sin in his body, entering death and rising with scars still visible. Grace pressed the wood into her palm. She understood less than she once thought she did, but she trusted more deeply. That was not a trade she would have chosen. It was one suffering had carved. A year after the diagnosis, Grace returned to the same church kitchen where people had once hugged her carefully after hearing the news. Her hair had begun to grow back in soft, uneven curls. Treatment was finished for now. The phrase, "for now," kept her humble. She was not declared immune from fear. Follow-up scans would come. Waiting would come again. The body would remember. But that morning, she carried a paper bag filled with ginger candies. A woman from church, newly diagnosed, sat at the end of the table with the stunned look Grace recognized immediately. Her husband hovered behind her, helpless. People had said prayers, some good, some too many. Grace walked over and placed the paper bag gently in the woman's hand. "Ginger candies," she said, "for nausea. You may not need them, but if you do, you won't want to shop for them." The woman looked at the bag, then at Grace, and broke. Grace sat beside her, not above her, beside her. For a while she said nothing. That was the first gift. Then the woman whispered, "Why is this happening?" "I tried to live right." Grace felt the old bargain in the sentence. She knew that bargain. She had buried it. "I don't know why this is your road," Grace said, "and I won't insult you by pretending I do." The woman cried harder. Grace continued softly, "But I know this. Your suffering does not mean God has stepped away. You can tell him the truth. You do not have to sound strong. Take the next day's grace. Let people help. Hold grief and gratitude if both are there. And when you cannot feel anything else, remember this: nothing in this can separate you from the love of Christ." The woman held the bag like it was something holy. Maybe it was. Not the candy. The mercy passed from one sufferer to another. Grace looked across the kitchen. Nathan was helping stack chairs. Emma, taller now, laughing with a friend near the doorway. Denise talking to someone by the coffee urn. Hannah carrying towels. Ordinary church life. Ordinary bodies. Ordinary people with invisible wounds, hidden scans, grieving marriages, prodigal children, unpaid bills, quiet fears. She once thought suffering was the exception. Now she knew it was a language spoken somewhere in every room. The question was not whether good people suffer. They do. The Bible never hides that. Abel was murdered, though his offering pleased God. Joseph was betrayed, though God was with him. Moses was rejected by the people he was sent to deliver. Hannah wept in barrenness before Samuel was born. David fled caves, though anointed king. Jeremiah preached truth and was thrown into a cistern. Daniel was faithful and still entered the lion's den. Mary was chosen and still watched her son die. John the Baptist prepared the way and lost his head in prison. Paul carried the gospel and carried scars. Jesus was sinless and suffered most. So the question is not, why do good people suffer as if suffering disproves God? The deeper question is, what kind of God enters a world where good people suffer, takes on flesh, bears grief, carries sin, dies under injustice, rises from the grave, and promises that suffering will not have the final word? That is the Christian answer, not a neat explanation, a crucified and risen Lord. Grace stood later outside the church as evening light stretched across the parking lot. The woman with the diagnosis had gone home. The bag of ginger candies had gone with her. Nathan came and stood beside Grace, shoulder touching hers. "You okay?" he asked. Grace thought about the word. Okay was too small. Alive was closer. Held was truest. "I'm here," she said. He took her hand. She could still fear the next scan. She could still grieve what treatment had taken. She could still hate the word cancer. She could still ask God hard questions. None of that cancelled faith. Faith had become less like certainty that pain would avoid her, and more like trust that Christ would not abandon her inside it. The clock on the church wall struck 6. Grace smiled faintly. Time was still moving. So was she. Not beyond suffering forever. Not yet, but through it with Christ. And someday, Scripture promised, even through would end. Revelation says, God will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Revelation chapter 21, not minimized. Passed away, not explained, until people stop weeping, wiped away by God Himself. Grace held the wooden cross in her pocket, the same cross she had once put down because it accused her. Now she held it because it told the truth. Good people suffer, faithful people suffer, loved people suffer, but suffering is not proof that God has lost His grip. The cross is proof that God entered the suffering. The resurrection is proof that suffering will lose. And until that day, the lesson is not to pretend pain is light. The lesson is to discover that Christ is present. Christ is enough. Christ is near to the brokenhearted. Christ is Lord of the hospital room, the kitchen floor, the scan result, the waiting room, the surgery hall, the chemo chair, the parking lot tears, the ginger candy in a trembling hand. Grace looked at Nathan, at the church, at the fading light. Then she whispered the sentence she could not have said honestly at the beginning. God is with us in this. This time, it was not a card she wrote for someone else. It was bread she had tasted in the dark. The day Grace rang the bell at the treatment center, she expected joy to arrive like a clean ending. She had imagined the sound for months. A bright metal note, nurses clapping, Nathan filming, Emma crying, everyone smiling because the hardest chapter had closed. She had watched other people ring it while she sat in the infusion chair, weak and jealous and ashamed of being jealous. She had told herself that when her turn came, she would feel victory. But when she stood beneath the bell with a paper certificate in one hand and Nathan's phone pointed at her from across the room, she felt something stranger: relief, grief, fear, gratitude, and a hollow place where certainty still refused to live. The nurse smiled. "Ready?" Grace nodded because everyone was watching. She took the rope and pulled. The bell rang once, twice, 3 times. People clapped. Emma cried. Nathan's mouth trembled as he tried to keep the video steady. Denise stood near the doorway with tears in her eyes. The woman in the red scarf from treatment raised both hands from her chair. Grace smiled because she meant the smile. She was thankful, truly, but beneath the sound of the bell, another thought whispered, what if it comes back? That was the part no one puts in celebration photos. The bell announces the end of treatment. It does not silence the fear of recurrence. Grace hugged the nurses, thanked the staff, posed for pictures, held Emma too long, let Nathan kiss her forehead. She accepted flowers from the church women and a card from the receptionist. Everyone said, "You did it." She nodded, but inside, she knew the truth was less triumphant and more dependent. She had been carried. That was the lesson suffering had carved too deeply for applause to erase. She had not powered through cancer by becoming extraordinary. She had been fed by daily mercy, driven to appointments, washed by weakness, held by prayers she did not have strength to pray, cleaned by Hannah's hands, steadied by Denise's ginger candies, loved by Nathan's exhausted faithfulness, watched by Emma's frightened courage, sustained by the Christ who did not make suffering look small, but made his presence larger inside it. When they left the treatment center, the afternoon light was sharp and cold. Nathan carried the flowers. Emma carried the certificate. Grace carried the wooden cross in her pocket and a body that still did not feel fully hers. In the parking lot, everyone seemed too happy and too careful at once. Emma said, "Can we get ice cream?" Nathan laughed. "It's freezing." So, Grace looked at her daughter, at the hope in her face, at the hunger for a normal celebration. "Yes," Grace said, "ice cream." They drove to the small place near the park, the one that stayed open year-round because some people apparently believed ice cream was not seasonal, but moral. Emma ordered the largest size with 2 toppings. Nathan got coffee because he was a sensible man, even in celebration. Grace ordered vanilla and ate slowly, tasting sweetness through a mouth still altered by treatment. At the table, Emma said, "Does this mean it's over?" The question froze the spoon halfway to Grace's mouth. Nathan looked at her. Grace could have said, yes. It would have been kind for the moment. It would have given Emma the clean ending she wanted. It would have given Grace one too. But suffering had taught her that false certainty is a fragile gift. It breaks later and cuts deeper. "Treatment is over," Grace said carefully. "That part is over." Emma looked down at her ice cream. "But scans still happen." "Yes? And you could still get sick again." Grace felt Nathan's hand move under the table, finding hers. "Yes," Grace said, "that is possible." Emma's eyes filled. "I hate that." "Me too." For a moment, the ice cream shop became another waiting room. A child at the next table laughed. A machine hummed. Someone opened the door and let cold air sweep across the floor. Grace watched her daughter holding both celebration and fear in one small body and felt the old impulse to rescue her with certainty. But she had learned another way. She said, "But we are not going to live today inside every possible future." Emma wiped her face with her sleeve. Grace continued, "Today, treatment ended. Today, we eat ice cream. Today, we thank God. When the next scan comes, we will ask for grace for that day." Nathan squeezed her hand. "Daily bread," again. Always daily bread. That was the lesson suffering kept teaching after suffering seemed to end. Grace is often given in portions the frightened heart considers too small. Enough for surgery day, enough for chemo day, enough for the parking lot, enough for the bell, enough for one conversation with a daughter who wants guarantees. God had not given Grace a lifetime supply of emotional certainty. He had given himself day by day. After they came home, the house looked almost festive. Flowers on the counter, cards lined up near the window. Emma taped the treatment certificate to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. Nathan made soup, badly, because he insisted celebration soup was a category. Grace sat at the kitchen table and watched him burn garlic with great confidence. For months, she had dreamed of ordinary strength. Now, ordinary weakness looked holy. Nathan burning garlic, Emma complaining about homework, the dishwasher making a grinding sound that meant someone had loaded it wrong, a pile of mail, a scarf hanging over the chair, her own tired body wrapped in a blanket. Nothing dramatic, everything miraculous. The phone buzzed. A message from the woman she had given ginger candies to. First treatment tomorrow. I'm scared. Does the fear ever go away? Grace stared at the screen for a long time. The old Grace before cancer might have answered too quickly. Something hopeful, something true, but polished. God is with you. You are stronger than you think. One day at a time. She had written versions of those sentences before, and some were not wrong, but suffering had taught her that truth should not be rushed into someone's wound wearing clean shoes. She typed slowly. Some fear may leave, some may come back in waves. Do not panic when it does. Fear is not proof that faith is gone. Tell Jesus the truth. Take tomorrow's grace tomorrow. I will pray tonight, and I can sit with you during treatment if you want. She sent it. The reply came almost immediately. Please sit with me. Grace closed her eyes. A year earlier, she would have thought ministry meant having answers. Now she knew sometimes it meant having scars and a calendar. The next morning, Grace returned to the treatment center, not as a patient in the chair, but as a woman sitting beside one. The smell hit her first. Antiseptic, coffee, plastic tubing, warmed blankets, fear disguised as routine. Her body remembered before her mind was ready. For a second, nausea rose even though no medication entered her veins. Trauma has a memory. The body keeps records. The mouth has not filed. She almost turned back. Then she saw the woman from church sitting near the window, pale, hands clenched around a tissue. The paper bag of ginger candies lay on the side table like a small flag. Grace walked over and sat beside her. No speech, no lesson, just presence. The woman whispered, I thought finishing treatment would make you want to never come back here. It did, Grace said. Then why are you here? Grace looked at the IV pole, the chairs, the nurses moving gently between people, the window where winter light rested on the floor. Because someone came back for me. The woman nodded, and tears fell silently. That was the strange economy of suffering redeemed by Christ. Pain that was not good in itself could become a place where mercy was learned, then carried. The wound did not become beautiful because it hurt. It became useful because Christ entered it and refused to waste it. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 says, God comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Grace had read that verse before as a nice idea. Now it had a smell, a chair, a bag of ginger candy, a woman's trembling hands. Comfort was not abstract. It had weight. It had timing. It had the humility to sit in rooms you would rather forget. During the infusion, the woman asked, were you ever angry at God? Grace almost smiled sadly. Yes. What did you do with it? Badly at first. The woman gave a broken laugh. Grace continued, then I learned to pray it instead of letting it rot inside me. Did he answer? Not everything I asked. The woman looked disappointed and relieved at the same time. But he stayed, Grace said, and over time that became an answer I could live on. The woman looked toward the window. Grace did too. For a while, neither spoke. That silence was not empty, it was shelter. Months passed again, because healing is often less like a door and more like a long hallway. Grace went to follow up appointments. Some were clean. One scan required a second look and stole a week of sleep before turning out to be scar tissue. Emma became more herself, then suddenly anxious before every appointment. Nathan carried his own delayed exhaustion after everyone assumed he should be relieved. Grace learned that caregivers often collapse after the crisis light dims because their bodies finally received permission to feel what they carried. They began family counseling. At first, Grace hated it. She did not want cancer to keep taking evenings. She wanted to be done, normal, grateful, restored. But the counselor said something that stayed with her. Survival is not the same as healing. That sentence became another lesson. Suffering can end externally while fear continues internally. The Red Sea can close behind you, and still Egypt can echo in your nervous system. Two is free from Pharaoh before they learned how to live as free people. Grace had been declared done with treatment before her soul knew how to stop scanning the horizon for danger. One night, weeks before her first anniversary scan, Grace woke at 2:17 again, the same hour as the first honest prayer. The house was dark. Nathan slept beside her. Her body was stronger now, but the old fear knew the route back. What if the scan shows something? What if the treatment was not enough? What if hope made you careless? What if everyone relaxes and then everything breaks again? She got out of bed and went downstairs. The kitchen clock glowed. On the counter sat a new paper bag of ginger candies she had bought for the woman from church. Grace took one out and held it in her palm. A circle had closed, but not perfectly. She was not back where she began. She was in the same kitchen with a different heart and some of the same fears. She placed the wooden cross beside the candy. Then she prayed, "Father, I am afraid again." No shame, no editing, no dramatic self-criticism, just truth. I still hate that scans can do this to me. I still want guarantees. I still want to be done needing daily bread. But I know you were with me then. Be with me now. She paused. And if fear comes tomorrow too, meet me tomorrow too. There was no lightning. There was memory, the memory of the first night when anger had felt dangerous and hope had felt like a torn thread. The memory of the parking lot after the scan results. Nathan holding her, Emma asking if she would die, Denise's bag, Hannah cleaning, the surgery hallway, Romans 8 in the chemo chair, the bell, the woman in treatment, all of it gathered around her like witnesses. Hebrews chapter 12 speaks of being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses and running with perseverance the race marked out, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Grace understood that differently now. The witnesses were not only ancient saints in stained glass, they were also the remembered mercies that said, "He carried you there. He can carry you here." She ate the ginger candy, sharp sweetness. Again, the scan was clear. Grace cried in the car after the call, harder than she expected. Nathan cried too, laughing and wiping his face with the back of his hand. Emma demanded pizza. They ordered too much. People from church sent messages. Grace answered some and ignored others without guilt. That night she stood before the mirror again, hair growing back in unruly curls, body changed, scars visible. She touched the scar. For months she had avoided looking too long. The scar felt like evidence of violation, survival, loss, mercy, and fear all at once. She had wanted to either hate it or call it beautiful. Neither felt honest. It was a scar, a mark that something had happened, a mark that something had been cut out, a mark that she had lived. The lure with scars. That did not make every scar glorious in itself, but it meant scars could belong to resurrection life. They did not have to be hidden from him. She whispered, "This body is still yours." That became another form of worship, not glamorous. True, a year later, Grace spoke at a small gathering for women in the church. She had resisted when asked, not because she feared public speaking, but because she feared becoming a symbol. People love turning survivors into clean stories, before and after, diagnosis and victory, tears and triumph. But real suffering was messier than that. She agreed only after telling the pastor, "I will not make pain sound tidy." He said, "Please don't." She stood in the church fellowship hall, not on a stage, but near the same table where she had once handed ginger candies to another woman. Nathan sat in the back, Emma beside him, older now, watching her mother with complicated pride. Grace held the wooden cross in one hand. "I used to think good people suffering was a problem I needed to solve for God," she began. "Then I suffered, and I discovered God did not ask me to defend him with shallow answers." The room was still. She continued, "The Bible never promised that faithfulness keeps pain from entering the house. Abel was righteous and murdered. Job was upright and shattered. Hannah was loved and barren. David was anointed and hunted. Jeremiah was obedient and thrown into a pit. Daniel prayed and still entered the lion's den. Mary was favored and still watched her son die. Jesus was sinless and suffered more than all. She looked around the room at women with hidden stories in their eyes. So if your life is hard, do not assume God has stepped away, but also do not let anyone rush you into pretending it does not hurt. A woman in the second row began to cry. Grace did not rush. That was one of the first things I had to learn. Pain is not proof that God is absent. Tears are not proof that faith has failed. Lament is not unbelief. The Psalms are full of faithful people who knew how to weep toward God instead of away from Him. She lifted the cross slightly. This is not an explanation that makes every why disappear. This is the place where God entered the wound. The cross does not tell us suffering is small. It tells us God came near enough to bleed. And the resurrection does not tell us suffering is harmless. It tells us suffering is temporary. The sentence landed. She let it. Then she told the story, not all of it, not every private detail, but enough. The doctor's office, the 2:17 prayer, Emma's question, Nathan in the garage, the scam parking lot, the surgery hallway, the chemo chair, Denise, Hannah, the woman with the ginger candies, the bell that did not remove fear, the clear scan that still required daily grace, the scar in the mirror. She gave the 15 lessons, but not like points on a board. She gave them like stones from a river she had crossed. Goodness is not a contract that makes life safe. Suffering reveals what belief has been avoiding. God can handle ugly prayer. Hope is deeper than optimism. Control was always an illusion. Compassion can grow where bitterness could have grown. Faith tells the truth under God's presence. Presence can be holier than explanation. Words must bear, not merely explain. Grief and gratitude can live in the same hands. Ordinary gifts are holy because they are not guaranteed. Surrender can ask for the cup to pass. Grace is usually daily, not imaginary strength for every future. Humility receives help. Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. When she said the last one, her voice trembled, not because she doubted it, because she had needed it so badly. Romans 8 had become less like a favorite chapter and more like ground under her feet. Trouble did not separate. Hardship did not separate. Danger did not separate. Cancer did not separate. Fear did not separate. Surgery did not separate. Surgery did not separate. Scares did not separate. Even death, whenever it came, would not separate those who are in Christ from the love of God. After she finished, no one applauded immediately. Good. Some truths need silence before sound. Then women came to her, not all at once, one by one. A miscarriage, a husband's addiction, a prodigal son, chronic pain, depression, a diagnosis not yet shared publicly, a marriage dying quietly. Grace listened. She did not try to become everyone's healer. She had learned that was not her place. She gave presence where she could, truth where it fit, and sometimes only tears. Near the end, a younger woman asked, "Do you think suffering made you stronger?" Grace thought carefully. "That depends on what you mean by stronger," she said. "If you mean less afraid, no. I still fear things. If you mean more in control, definitely not. If you mean more aware that I am weak and Christ is near, then yes." The woman nodded slowly. "That kind of strength does not look impressive," Grace added, "but it holds." That evening, after the gathering, Grace walked outside alone for a moment. The parking lot was quiet. The sky was deep blue, not yet black. She could hear voices inside, chairs moving, laughter returning, because human beings cannot live in intensity forever. She was glad for that. Laughter after sorrow is not betrayal, it is oxygen. Nathan came out and stood beside her. "You told the truth," he said. "I tried." "You did." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever wish we could go back?" he asked. Grace knew what he meant. Back before the diagnosis, before the doctor's office, before Emma's question, before the surgery scars, before chemo, before the waiting room theology, before 217 became an altar. "Yes," she said. He nodded. Then she added, "But not if going back means losing what God gave us in the dark." That was the terrible mystery. She would not choose suffering. She would not romanticize it. She would not call cancer a gift. But she could not deny that gifts had come in it. Not from the cancer itself, as if disease were holy, but from God, who knows how to bring water from rocks and resurrection from tombs. Nathan took her hand. Inside the church, someone laughed loudly, probably Emma. Grace smiled. She thought of Joseph, who told his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis chapter 50. Not that the harm was not harm. It was. Betrayal was betrayal. Slavery was slavery. Prison was prison. But God was not absent from the pit, the house, the prison, the famine, or the reunion. He was weaving what evil meant for destruction into a mercy large enough to save many lives. Grace did not know all that God was weaving. She no longer needed to pretend she did. That was another freedom. Months became years. Follow-up scans became less terrifying, though never casual. Emma graduated high school and wrote an essay about fear, faith, and the night her mother told her the truth instead of giving false certainty. Nathan started volunteering to drive patients to appointments once a month. Denise eventually moved away to live near her grandchildren, but sent ginger candies in the mail like a sacred joke. Hannah still cleaned for people in crisis and refused payment with the aggression of a woman committed to mercy. The woman from church finished treatment and later brought ginger candies to someone else. Grace kept the wooden cross on her dresser. Sometimes she touched it before appointments. Sometimes before speaking with someone who had just received terrible news. Sometimes on ordinary mornings when nothing was wrong except the old human fear that something could become wrong. The cross reminded her of the only answer large enough to carry suffering without lying about it. God did not stay far. Christ came. Christ suffered. Christ died. Christ rose. Christ will make all things new. One spring afternoon, Grace returned to the hospital for a routine check and passed the radiology waiting room. The television was still there. Different cooking show. Same impossible cheerfulness. People still sat with clipboards, coats, water bottles, hidden prayers. Grace paused at the doorway. A woman looked up from a form, eyes wide with the fresh terror of someone new to the country of waiting. Grace did not know her. She did not know whether to speak. Then the woman dropped her pen. Grace picked it up and handed it back. Their eyes met. For 1 second, the old language passed between them without words. "I know this room," the woman whispered. "Thank you." Grace nodded. "You're welcome," she walked on. Not every mercy becomes a conversation. Some are only a pen returned in a waiting room. That too mattered. When Grace left the hospital that day, the test was normal. She stood outside under a sky washed clean by morning rain and breathed deeply, not because she was safe from all future suffering. No one is, but because breath was here now. Light was here now. Light was here now. Christ was here now. The day was here now. The day was here. Good people suffer. That sentence remained true, but it was no longer the end of the sentence. Good people suffer and God sees. Good people suffer and Christ is near. Good people suffer, and the church is called to carry ginger candies, clean bathrooms, sit in silence, drive to appointments, pray without forcing answers, tell the truth gently, and bear one another's burdens. Good people suffer, and lament is allowed. Good people suffer, and hope is not cancelled. Good people suffer, and ordinary gifts become holy. Good people suffer, and even when the body weakens, nothing can separate those in Christ from his love. Good people suffer, but suffering is not eternal. Grace looked at the small wooden cross in her hand. The scars in her body remained. So did the mercy. And somewhere deep inside, beneath fear, beneath gratitude, beneath all the unanswered questions she no longer tried to solve in one sentence, faith had become quieter and heavier than before. Not shiny, not easy, not untouched, but real. She whispered, "God is with us in this." Then she walked to the car, not beyond the reach of suffering, not yet beyond tears, but held by the one who has promised that one day his own hand will wipe every tear away. And on that day, the question will no longer be why good people suffered. The question will be how the wounded ever thought they were walking alone.